we're going to go ahead and get started. Today's presentation is called Neurodevelopmental Movement Questions and Answers with Jocelyn Williams. And my name is Jocelyn Williams. I'm a wife, a mother of 5 kiddos. I am an educator. I have my master's in education, and I am the founder and director of Neurally Solutions. Neurally Solutions Incorporated provides neurodevelopmental movement, a movement-based educational approach to equipping the brain for life. And I'd like to begin by telling you a little story. And this is a true story. This is a picture of one of my clients. And we're going to call her Baby Girl just to protect her identity. Baby Girl was born, and when she was born, she had several complications, including an unstable birth mother. So birth mom was out of the picture. Baby girl's in the hospital, and she had to have about 3 surgeries before she left the hospital. Unfortunately, the 3 surgeries failed, and so when she left the hospital, she was placed in a foster care home with a phenomenal foster care mom. And foster care mom was told that this precious child would never be able to eat, drink, or poop independently. She was on a feeding tube, and she had to have a bag to catch her stool. Mom came to me, and I said, let's go ahead. By the time she came to me, she was 7 months old. Her wounds were healed, and we put her on her tummy, and we started the infant developmental sequence. And this is her today. She is doing remarkable. After engaging and being given the opportunity to go through the infant developmental sequence, we saw remarkable changes for precious baby girl. She no longer needs a feeding tube. In fact, another surgery was scheduled, and that surgery was canceled. And instead, what they did was they reconstructed her small intestine and her large intestine, and now she can poop on her own. She doesn't need a bag anymore. She can eat and she can drink all by herself independently. As she was going through neurodevelopmental movement, it was amazing to watch her growth in such a short period of time. So much so that she was discharged from first steps early. Her physical therapist said she has surpassed my expectations and even what I planned for her on this day. And she even got to the point where she surpassed typical children in her age group. And this is a premature child who underwent trauma, being separated from her birth mom, placed in intensive care, had several surgeries, and was told that she would be on a feeding tube for life. And she is doing absolutely remarkable. Now, the work that we're going to talk about, there's a couple of phrases you're going to hear, or titles: the infant developmental sequence and neurodevelopmental movement. And just to clarify, the infant developmental sequence is what every unimpeded, unimpaired infant organically engages in. This is what they go through. They engage in a logical, systematic progression that develops the central nervous system. When a child, an infant, misses the infant developmental sequence, we replicate it, and we call that neurodevelopmental movement. So the first part of the presentation, we will primarily be talking about the infant developmental sequence. And in a nutshell, if there's one thing I want you to remember today, is that babies need lots of movement, lots and lots of movement. So, okay, so now we're going to get into the infant developmental sequence. The process of the infant developmental sequence impacts the development of the infant's soul, their mind, their heart, which is the seat of our emotions, and their strength, which is their physical body, okay? And their physical body includes sensation, what I feel inside, and also what I feel on my body, okay? And given the opportunity to engage in movement, okay, reflexive patterns and sensory, so those are the three main components of the infant developmental sequence: movement, reflexive patterns, and sensory work, okay? When they're given the opportunity to go have this, these three pieces, in essence, we like to say that they're given equal access and opportunity to equip their brain for life. And what do we mean by equipping their brain for life? The brain, it develops in stages. Just like a baby, when they're first born, they have a hand, but they don't have access to that hand yet. When an infant is first born, they can't begin to write and they can't begin to feed themselves. This develops over time. So is the case with the brain. The brain develops one layer at a time. And when the infant is first born, the foundational levels of the brain, we can't speak to that part of the brain to develop. That part of the brain is responsible for all of our automatic functions, things like breathing, okay, balance, regulation, things like feeling safe, secure, and bonded. We can't logically teach an infant how to do these things. What they need is this infant developmental sequence. And when they go through that process, that foundational part of the brain becomes firm and strong, and then the rest of the brain can develop, can continue to develop. If there are gaps in that part of the brain, then we have some difficulties, and we'll get into that a little bit later, okay? So gaps, injury, or trauma interrupts the process of the infant developmental sequence. And this can, and many times does, affect the infant's future global development. And again, we'll talk about that here in just a minute, okay? So what is the infant developmental sequence? As I stated a bit earlier, the developmental sequence includes movement, reflexive patterns, and sensory. I'm going to really hone in on movement. Patterns and sensory work, that's going to be a whole nother workshop. But for today, I will, in essence, discuss one part of it, okay, which is the movement piece. So the process, we like to say, is as simple as A, B, and C. But what's very important is that this process needs to occur before the infant begins to walk. Okay, so let's begin with A. A, from birth, infants need to be on their tummies approximately 50% of a 24-hour period. We like to call this tummy all the time. B, tummy all the time leads into tummy crawling, which includes the belly button being flat on the ground and the baby moving forward. This form of movement is very similar to an army crawl. Not exactly, but very similar. And here's the tip. If a baby doesn't need mittens, okay, on their hands, they do not need socks. When a baby is engaging in tummy crawling, all a baby needs is a comfortable onesie and a safe floor to crawl around on. From there, we go into C. C, at approximately 6 to 12 months, babies need an ample amount of time to creep on their hands and knees. So A is for all, tummy all the time. B is for crawling with the belly flat on the ground. And C is creeping on hands and knees. And notice the little baby in this image the belly button is not on the ground, okay? Babies should have the opportunity to creep until their creeping has developed into an efficient cross-lateral movement. They should not, they should be discouraged, I'll rephrase that, they should be discouraged from walking until they have completed their tummy all the time, their tummy crawling, and then their hands and knees creeping. If we have a baby that's butt scooting or they do not have an efficient cross-lateral movement, we are going to continue taking measures to enable them to engage in their infant developmental sequence before they walk. Now, why is the infant developmental sequence so important? And what is all the fuss about? Why not simply carry the baby around all the time or keep them in containers such as car seats? After all, this is so much more convenient and lucrative, especially for the toy industry. Well, the reason why is because when an infant engages in the developmental sequence, they, as I stated earlier, are given equal access and opportunity to equip that foundational level of the brain, right? And here are some examples. A baby who is a happy little soul and who is well bonded to their primary caretaker. A child who is socially and emotionally equipped to have healthy peer interactions. A student who is able to learn well, and finally, an adult who has the strength needed to make a positive global impact. Amongst many things, the developmental sequence develops key systems and functions in the human infant. Those systems include the auditory, visual, and tactile systems. The functions are the motor, communication, and hand functions. And I'm going to touch on each of these areas briefly. Now, please note, each area can be unpacked in great depth if time allowed. But within an hour, we're going to condense it, okay? So, system one, visual, okay? When a baby is first born, their little eyes, you can flash a light in their eyes and their little pupils are going to close up. Take the light away, their little pupils are going to expand, okay? They also only have vision about the space, about the length between their primary caretaker's arms and primary caretaker's eyes. And this is significant because while the primary caretaker is feeding baby, whether it be nursing or bottle feeding, that opportunity for the primary caretaker and the baby to gaze into each other's eyes really helps to set an oxytocin-based brain, okay? When mom's eyes are relaxed and happy and engaging with that baby, okay, this sets the stage for bonding, and then later on, that affects learning and exploration. Now, if the primary caretaker's eyes are tense, angry, aloof, or distracted, you know, let's get the bottle here and let me be on my phone here, over here, okay, we're setting the stage for a cortisol-based brain, okay? And this affects this baby later on in life academically, emotionally, physically, and so forth. In terms of auditory, okay, in terms of auditory, all babies are born with a moral reflex. That reflex needs to be integrated. And the infant developmental sequence integrates the moral reflex. When that moral reflex is well integrated, later on in life, this helps a child to be able to attend and to focus. If it is not well integrated, it can cause that child, or even adult, later on in life, to have a surplus of attention. Okay, they have to be looking around, right? Or they can be completely absorbed in only that one thing that they're doing. One example that we see often of a child who has a retained moral reflex is those kiddos who you put on a vacuum cleaner and they startle, ah, why'd you put that on? Why didn't you tell me before you turned that on? Oftentimes that tells us this child missed an important piece of their infant developmental sequence, and they have what we call a retained moral reflex. Okay, now if that moral reflex is integrated properly, okay, and this baby is well bonded, right, then later on it helps things like having the ability to read social cues, which enables us to have healthy social interactions. We've come across kiddos who they think, oh, they're so mad at me, or they always think their mom is mad at them. Why? Because they lack the capacity to read nonverbal social cues. It's amazing when we get these reflexes, these retained reflexes integrated, and do some other work, how well these children can interact with other children. Now, the tactile system is also developed by the infant developmental sequence. The tactile system is very important. This system is where we begin to see the seeds of compassion. We sow the seeds of compassion into a child. When we take that time to meet their needs as an infant, right? We hear a crying baby, we get up, we feed them, we take care of them, we give them warm baths, we hug them, we massage them, we hold them, we give them tummy time. We allow them to explore the world around them and receive all types of sensory input into their system. When we allow that, apart from an injury, okay, that child, that infant later on in life can have a good sense of empathy for others. Why? Because they have developed the ability to understand how they feel. Many of the kids that I see, not all of them, but some, I'll say some of the kids that I see when they're older, if they have not developed, if that tactile system has not been well developed and is not working efficiently, we might see things like they have a very high pain tolerance. If they have a high pain tolerance, oftentimes they lack empathy or compassion. Why? Because they cannot feel. If I can't feel what affects me, how can I feel what affects you? And sometimes later on in life, these kiddos that have an underdeveloped tactile system, not some of them, not all of them, can be what we call a bully, right? Because it doesn't really matter if I bop you on the head. I can't feel it. It doesn't bother me at all because I have such a high pain tolerance. And so what we do is we work through that. We make sure that our kiddos go through the infant developmental sequence so that they can have a well-developed tactile system. Can we guarantee that everything is going to work flawlessly? No, we live in a real world, but we can do our very best to set these kiddos up, our infants up, for success later on in life. And what is success, right? There's lots of different definitions of success. But for me, I like to think this child is a happy soul who can respond well to the people and their environment. They can be productive and giving and generous and contribute to our world and society. Okay. Now, the functions that the infant developmental sequence help to develop are the motor functions, communication, and hand functions. So let's talk about motor function. As we said, infants need to be on their tummies all the time. It's their default position, okay? At least 50% of a 24-hour period. I pick you up, I feed you, I take care of you, I meet your needs, and then I put you back on your tummy, okay? About 5 or 10 minutes later, you're fussing again, you need a diaper change, I change your diaper, I love you, I do oohs and ahs with you, and then guess what? Back on your tummy, right? Why so? Because what happens when this precious baby is given that opportunity to be on their tummy, what do they begin to do? They begin to lift their head, look around. They begin to reach out, okay? They begin to reach out with their hands. They begin to dig with their toes, and then they start doing tummy crawling. And when they have the opportunity to tummy crawl, this stabilizes the lumbar curves of the spine, helps to create arches in the foot, forms a solid hip socket, and guess what? It stimulates the genital area, preparing that infant for toilet training later on at an appropriate age. So many of the older kids that I work with, when we assess them and they've missed the infant developmental sequence, they could be 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and they're still having potty accidents. And we're not talking, you know, just kids that have a diagnosis. This could be just a typical functioning child, okay? But they cannot feel that, oh, I have to go to the bathroom. They don't have a well-developed motor function and tactile system, and they're still having potty accidents. And so then we go back, we take them through the infant developmental sequence, and that's one of the things that resolves is potty accidents. Here is Jairus. Jairus has Down syndrome. And this is what his mom wrote into me. Already, I am completely amazed at what Jairus has accomplished. Our list of accomplishments is so long, but some of the highlights include mental math, sight words, no potty accidents after 5 years of potty training, puzzling independently, speaking in full sentences, asking questions, no more limping, no more hip popping out of the socket. This little guy, his hip used to pop out so much, his mom used to have to put it back in place about 5 times a day. And they wanted to do hip surgery. And then after engaging in this work, the surgery was canceled, and he does not have to have hip surgery anymore. He is doing amazing. Okay, he doesn't fall over or trip anymore. He has the ability to climb ladders, the ability to zip his coat independently. He now has feelings of remorse, and he is bonding with his baby brother. And before meeting him, his baby brother was just another piece of furniture in the room and just had to get out of his way. And now he has the ability to bond with his baby brother. So another area is communication. Many of our kiddos, when they go through the infant developmental sequence, they have a well-developed, not all, but many have a well-developed communication system. Some of the children that I work with, when they come to me, sometimes they're stuttering, sometimes they do not have language. They cannot speak in a full sentence, and we go through this process with them, and their communication comes together. I'm not going to promise that if we have a nonverbal child that they will begin speaking. That's a promise that I cannot make, but we have seen it happen. Okay. Another area is hand function. Okay. Whoa, this it's very interesting when I read little comments about this, especially on social media. Let's go back to that tummy time and our conversation about that little baby that's reaching and then they begin to supinate, pronate. Well, supination, pronation leads to cortical opposition, which then leads to a tripod grip, and then they're able to write. Many of the kids that I work with, when they go through this process, I even tell, I work with a lot of homeschool moms as well. I tell them, if they're not interested in writing, give us some time. Give us some time, let them go through this process, and let's see what happens. And oftentimes that tripod grip comes into play naturally and organically on its own as they engage in the developmental sequence. Okay. This precious little girl had the opportunity, and I have permission, by the way, to show these photos and even the names of all of these clients of mine. And this is what they wrote in. She got to go through the infant developmental sequence from early on. Thanks, Jocelyn. We can't express enough how much we appreciate you. We were again talking last week about how you have shaped our parenting. Another compliment from our program director at the library. She called our little Miss Sunshine a genius baby. No, not genius, just unhindered in development. And this is from Sam and Devin Blanetti. So, in summary, the developmental sequence for infants is as simple as A, B, and C. However, the impact is profound, and it's important to note that it needs to occur before the baby starts walking. There are so many programs that come and go in waves. You know, let's practice crossing the midline. Let's do sensory integration. Let's do reflex integration. Let's put on this device. Let's try that. What I love about this process is that it is not a man-made program. Those researchers that I spoke of early on in this presentation, they observed babies all over the world in different socioeconomic settings. And every single infant, if they were unimpaired, unimpeded, and given that opportunity, naturally and organically went through this process, this infant developmental sequence that developed the lower levels of the brain. Okay? And so we can work on an individual area, and you know, we can work on, you know, this piece in isolation, and let's just work on that piece in isolation. But really, we are global beings, and the developmental sequence provides a global approach to equipping the brain for life. So who do we work with? We work with infants, children, students, and even adults. We work with those on the spectrum, those with a diagnosis such as Down syndrome, those that have gone through some type of major bonding break such as adoption, trauma, foster care. We work with typical students that are so bright, but I had this one client, super bright, raised in a loving family, had everything he needed, and he was full of anxiety. So much so that he used to bite through a seatbelt, that he bit through a seatbelt over time because he had so much anxiety. He just kept chewing at that seatbelt when he was in the car and finally bit through it, okay? That's a lot of anxiety. And when you looked at his environment and how he was raised and who his parents were, it didn't add up. But then we looked at his history. This child had, his family had the means to give him everything he needed and even things he wanted. So they had all the fancy equipment. They kept him off the floor. They kept him protected. They kept him safe. They kept him entertained. But the only problem is he wasn't given the opportunity to move. And that caused him to have so many gaps in that foundational level. Well, we had him go through the process, and he's doing amazing. So much so that right now, I think my list of clients that I work with that are related to that family has now grown. As of today, I got another phone call with 5 more of their family members. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 plus 5, 12 family members, because they saw such a profound change in this child's life. All right, so let's move on to talk about our process, okay? If someone is interested in having your infant assessed to see if they are a candidate for the infant developmental sequence pathway, and even an older child for neurodevelopmental movement, our steps include the following. 1, setting up a video or in-person assessment. We are definitely offering video assessments during the pandemic season that we're in. And we also offer video assessments for those that are not local to us. And of course, we still see our clients in person, okay? The next step is training, okay? The developmental movement consultant will review the results of the assessment with the primary caretaker and provide training in the elements of the developmental sequence that their precious baby will need, okay? The primary caretaker is then given a daily movement plan and support protocols to ensure that their precious little one, again, has equal access and opportunity to complete the infant developmental sequence. As I've already shared throughout this presentation, neurodevelopmental movement provides what we call a second chance, okay? For older children, for students, and adults, we replicate the developmental sequence, and this pathway, again, is called neurodevelopmental movement, and it's based on neuroplasticity. So when given the right triggers, the brain is able to change. In other words, there is hope, there is a second chance. And during the assessment, we look intently for any gaps that in the developmental sequence. Again, we train the primary caregiver, and we provide them with a daily plan of movement, reflex integration, and sensation. Here's Lucia's story. This is another client of mine. And this is real life. This is what happens. I like to give you some of the things that are, or share with you some of the experience our clients have. And here's what this mom says. Is it easy? No. The day following our reassessment with you, we followed breakfast with the sequence of patterns and movement you suggested. It was a long, hard hour. There were some tears, there was some resistance, but we did not let her give up the fight. She got it done. She was so chill. She was in control all day. We repeated the next morning, same results in our day. Control, regulated emotions. The next day was church and Mother's Day, and we didn't get any in. I take responsibility for that. She did so well, though. This morning, we had a slower and tougher start to the morning. She wasn't doing well. She was losing control. And by the way, Lucia at the time was about 8 years old when Mom wrote this to me. Once I was able to get her fed, we powered through, and she fought me. She wanted to quit. I wanted to quit. I fought the urge to give up, and we got it done. I also was able to get more sensory sets in today. Her day turned around for her. Her chaotic morning calmed, and after the patterns and movements turned into a really great afternoon. I now see that morning is really truly key to helping her the most. Thank you. Thank you for your gentle and encouraging guidance and the wisdom you bring. For more information about Neurally Solutions, the infant developmental sequence, or neurodevelopmental movement, I would encourage you to contact me, Jocelyn Williams, at 317-936-6797. You can also reach me at jwilliams@nsibrain.com, and of course on social media at Neurally Solutions. And again, there's one golden nugget that I want to leave you with, okay? It's so important. Just like as adults, we need to move. If we stay still and never get out of bed, we eat in our bed, use the remote, don't get sunshine, that's not going to be good for our bodies. We need to move. Our babies need lots of movement from infancy to help equip their brains for life. Thank you. My name is Jocelyn Williams. I'm a developmental movement consultant with Neurally Solutions Incorporated, and it has been a pleasure to be with you this evening. Go.
Okay, so we had asked the question about babies sleeping on their bellies, and your recommendation is to give them every opportunity to be on their bellies, and sleeping in a safe environment, according to guidelines. But if they are on bellies, I tell my clients.
Well, let me clarify. I cannot and will never recommend putting a baby to sleep on their tummy, because that's going against the American Pediatric Association. So if they are not sleeping on their bellies, that does mean they are missing their infant patterns. Those infant patterns are the input that's needed for the central nervous system, and the output is movement. Okay, it's
Right.
that tummy crawling, tummy time, etc. So if they're not going to sleep on their tummies, then we suggest, because I'm an educational consultant, I can't officially make a recommendation, but I can make a suggestion that that they see a developmental movement consultant to get the pattern, so that they can be manually patterned.
Okay.
Go
ahead. I have clients that are concerned baby doesn't like tummy time, so I encourage them that when they do have baby on their chest, like tummy to mummy is what I say, that counts as tummy time. No, they need to actually be horizontal. Okay, so if the parents are laying on the floor, maybe, nope, they got to have that hard surface. Good to know.
Yeah. And the reason for that is because when they're all snuggled up on you, they're not able to engage in the movement. They're not able to engage in their infant patterns that they need to go through. So if they do not want to be on their tummies, there's typically a reason for that. It could be a number of things. It could be that they have a tongue tie. It could be that they have reflux. There's so many different ways we can go about this. So what we do is then we figure out what's going on organically. Why don't they want to be on their tummies? And we try to get that resolved. And once we get that resolved, most of our kids or clients will go on their tummy.
Okay. A fellow doula here in town, she has a 6-month-old that is already pulling up onto the furniture and standing, and she's like, should I knock him down? It's like, the recommendation
I wouldn't knock them down, but I would definitely discourage any climbing, any walking, any opportunity to walk, and make sure that precious little baby has finished tummy crawling and hands and knees creeping before they start walking. 6 months is way too early. What that baby is demonstrating is that he or she is super intelligent. They are very smart. They figured it out. This is what you're doing. I can do this, and I want to do this too. However, do you want a very smart, intelligent child who can sit down and learn, or a very smart, intelligent child who cannot learn and attend because they have a myriad of retained reflexes, because they haven't had the opportunity to go through their infant developmental sequence? So I'd rather a mom sacrifice now when the baby's little and encourage them to go through their infant developmental sequence, because the consequences later on, well, let's put that in the positive, because the benefits later on are going to outweigh the little bit of time that it took to go through this process. 1 year of that baby's life to go and invest and give them that time is so worth it. They have another, hopefully 80 years to live, right? And so, yeah, I would highly discourage any walking, climbing at 6 months of age.
So what would that look like, especially if they have older siblings they want to keep up with?
Yeah.
Do you just like remove a lot of the furniture, play on the floor in the belly yourself? Okay.
Yeah. Have the older kids get down on the belly with the
Okay.
baby. They all crawl around the house and make a game out of it. But I would discourage it, and you just keep going over to the baby and keep putting. Is it easy? No. You know, they're quick and they want to climb up, but you know, I usually have our parents just commit to a minimum of 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes in the afternoon of really encouraging that hands and knees creeping, because this child is already at that stage where they're trying to crawl, where the parent will just stop everything and just really encourage it. Is that enough? Not always. I like it to be more. Like, it's great if they could have, you know, a schedule in place of, we wake up, we feed, we diaper change, we get on the floor and we play, right? And we do that cycle every couple of hours. That's ideal, but not always possible.
Okay. Let me see what my next question was. You were talking about the Moro reflex. That's when everything.
Startle.
So you're saying the children that experience that strongly when they're an infant are more likely to have that difficulty with the nonverbal cues, or is it when they don't let go of the Moro reflex?
That's a great question. So let me clarify. So all babies are born with reflexes. Like, we know, you touch the cheek, they're going to automatically suck. If I walked up to you as an adult and I touch your cheek and you start sucking, that would be a little bit strange, right? All those reflexes should integrate. So they're born with the Moro reflex. They're born with the startle, okay?
Right.
And they should startle, because as an infant, that's like keeping them alive. If something dangerous is coming toward them, they're going to startle.
Right.
Okay? But the infant developmental sequence going through that process causes, unless there's an injury, should cause that Moro reflex to integrate. So by the time I'm 2, 3, 4, 10 years old, I should not be startling at various sounds.
Okay.
Unless there's an emergency, right? If, you know, kids hear a fire drill in school, they're going to stop and they're going to respond. But it should not cause them to scream and to be scared out of their pants. That's
Okay,
the
that
difference.
makes sense. How can we teach care providers like daycare, babysitters, how to integrate these movements? Because at home, the parents can be very attentive and doing that time, but having children going through childcare for our family personally, You have the cribs, you have the toy pit, and you have the swings, and they're trying to have 2 people take care of 8 babies.
Right.
It's just, what are ways that we can encourage care providers to integrate these things
Yeah.
so our children have the opportunity to develop even when they're not at home in that loving environment?
Sure, sure. Well, passing the word on to them, sharing recordings such as this webinar, you can share with them. And I also offer consultation to daycares. I'll go in, I'll do a presentation. I've actually will observe the classroom and give them tips and ideas on what they can do to help their babies go through the infant developmental sequence. I also offer group packages for schools, preschools, to help with it. So those are some ways I would say pass the word on, share the recordings, share the information. And we are always happy because my passion and my goal, I work with so many kids that are struggling. And, you know, even today, I was sharing with you before we started officially, I left my work, my office today, and I just was so grateful that what I do profoundly affects the life of a child and gives them a second chance. And that's awesome. And I love that. However, my greater passion is for a child not to have to see me when they're 10 years old. I'd rather the children go through the process of the infant developmental sequence, have a well-equipped brain, right? That foundational level of the brain that we talked about be shored up and solid so that when it's time for school or life, they're okay. I only want me to be available for older kids if there's an injury, right? They had a concussion and they need to kind of go through this process to help get things back in place. But that would bring a lot of joy to my heart.
Let's see. Trying to make sense of my notes here. The hand function, so early walkers that don't spend that time with the crawling process, bad handwriting, is that
Often.
the correlation?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I have our son that started walking at 9 months, and our daughter was 10 months, and handwriting is something to be desired.
Yes.
So
And they probably miss tummy crawling because that's where they develop that supination pronation that leads to cortical opposition that leads to the tripod grip.
okay, so if you had somebody that's struggling, would you like actually have them go back and do the crawling practice?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's important to note though that if you say, okay, I'm going to go home and have my kids tummy crawl, that's not going to do it. They need the
Right.
whole process. They need the patterns, they need the sensory input. And you need to know what you're doing because we do not want to trigger a regression by touching a reflex that sends them through the roof by accident. So it really should be done under guidance.
Absolutely. Let's see what this looks like. So if I had a client that was interested in contacting you, are you covered by insurance? What is the financial side of it so they would be able to know what to expect if they're wanting your services?
Great question. It is not a medical approach, it's an educational approach, so we are not covered by insurance. But when we figured it out, it's less than travel sports that kids are doing nowadays, and it's so well worth it. For prices and information on that, you can go to our website, neurly.com, for more information there, or you can contact me directly and I'll send out a price sheet to you.
Okay. I think that's all of the questions that I had.
Well, those were great questions. Thank you for asking. It has been a joy to spend this time with you. Thank you so much. So it's been wonderful having you here with us this evening. Again, my name is Jocelyn Williams. I am a developmental movement consultant. I am also the founder and director of Neurly Solutions Incorporated. For more information, you can contact me directly at 317-936-6797, at jwilliams@nsibrain.com, or check us out at neurly.com. It's been a pleasure. Have a great evening.